So I hadn't been planning on making a fourth installment of these videos, nor had I been planning to do one where I'm in front of the camera because I tend to move around too much and I'll make you seasick. But there have been a couple of things circulating recently from individual rabbis and groups of rabbis about shofar during this corona, and specifically about covering the end of the shofar with a mask or some piece of cloth in order to limit the spread of droplets that might come out of the Baltakia from the Baltakia and go through the shofar and spread. And one of the things that was said consistently in these things is, well, we tried it and it doesn't really change the sound. And while that's not exactly true, in terms of it does change the sound a little bit, as I'll demonstrate. It doesn't change it for purposes of the halacha as far as being okay. And what do we mean by that? The Shulchan Aruch discusses things about what's permissible in a shofar, like cracks or holes or whatever, and whether they change the sound or not. But when they mean by change the sound, they really do mean change the nature of sound. And I thought a way to demonstrate this is, I'm not going to put a hole in my shofar, but with the French horn, we have these neat little pieces of tubing that slide out. So here's a note with the tubing intact. Now, I take it out. Now there's a hole. What happens? The pitch is going to change because obviously it's much shorter now, but just the nature of the sound. Sounds kind of like a kazoo. So that's not what's going to happen when we cover the end of the shofar. Now with the horn, like all rest instruments, we actually have these things called mutes, which you can stick into the end of the horn to muffle the sound of it. So this is a standard straight mute. Right, that's with the mute. Here's without. And again with the straight mute. Okay, so you can hear it sounds a little bit different, a little bit muffled. And this is what's called a stopping mute. This stops up the airflow much more. I can actually get the same effect using just my hand, but we'll use this stopping mute. And this actually changes the pitch by a half step. As you can hear, it also changes the nature of the sound a little bit, makes it a little bit brassier. Composers actually use that to various effect when they're composing. That's what would happen if you tried to stuff the horn stuff the aperture of the shofar completely, but we'll get to that in a minute. Here's a standard paper surgical mask. I'm actually going to fix this with a scrunchie. Don't have any rubber bands around the house, so this is what we're using. But before doing that, let's just sound the shofar by itself. Okay. Now if we put the paper on, let's see how that works. So you can hear the pitch went up a little bit because the air's having a harder time coming out. And I can tell you as the person who's blowing, there's more resistance there. But it doesn't really fundamentally change the sound. Here's a cloth face mask. Let's see what happens when we attach this. Maybe I just won't even use a scrunchie, just hold it. Same kind of effect, right? The pitch goes up. It also sounds a little bit muffled. So I would imagine that when one is outside, the sound doesn't carry quite as far. Here in this small room where I am right now, and with the microphone close, it probably doesn't make much of a difference. But I would think that outdoors, that would make a significant difference. And whereas blowing it by itself, you can probably hear it a reasonable distance away. Putting one of those things over the hole here will probably reduce the distance at which the sound carries loudly. Now here is something a little bit different. This is a cloth diaper. I have it doubled over. Let's just see what happens when we do this. So you can hear it doesn't affect the sound quite as much as previously in terms of the pitch. Here it is without. And if we put this over, and raise the pitch slightly, it doesn't, I can tell you it doesn't provide as much resistance as the other two, but then this is a cloth diaper. It's not meant to, it's really not meant to try to keep aerosols or droplets from flowing, but I'm fairly sure this would do a reasonable job. If we double it over once more, so we now have 4 layers. Let's see what happens. So now you can hear the pitch went up quite a bit. Right, versus the 4 layers. And there's more resistance, but you can still hear it. Now, what would happen if we were to kind of bunch this up and sort of stuff up the end? Well, then it's going to sound a lot like that stopping mute on the French horn. Pitch has gone way up, much more muffled. Obviously, you can much harder to hear even in this small room, and much harder to blow through. So obviously that's not the goal. But the long and the short of it is, I think the suggestion from these different groups of rabbis or individual rabbis to cover the end of the shofar is not unreasonable. And I think certainly if one is indoors, it's worth doing. I don't know if it's necessary outdoors. I guess it depends on the setup and how far one is from everybody who's listening. One other thing I'll just mention I found kind of a little bit humorous was that in at least one of these things that was put out, they said, you can cover this opening with a mask, but don't wear a mask when you're blowing. Now, what I found humorous was the reason that they gave for this, because what they said is, well, because it'll constitute a chatzitza. In other words, it'll be like a barrier between your lips and the horn, and that's not allowed. So, for example, the Shulchan Aruch talks about you can put gold inlay, let's say, around the outside of the shofar, and you may have seen things like that. But you can't put it at the mouthpiece, right? There can't be anything between your lips and the horn. So yes, it's true. If I were to put on my surgical mask and try to blow the shofar, yes, this would be a chatzitza. But there's a more practical thing. You can't blow it if you do this. Right? Try this. Nope. Right? You just can't blow it. That's why you don't put the mask on. Forget about chatzitza. You simply will not be able to make a sound. In any event, so this year, putting one of these paper surgical masks over the end of the shofar is, as I said, probably a good idea. And wishing everybody Shana Tova.